Alien Girl felt the human's rhythm align with hers, but she mentioned the tradition only at dawn. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. It was a cold morning on the distant planet of Zira, an ice-covered world where the wind howled through the narrow, crystalline canyons. Jake, a human soldier, trudged through the thick snow, his breath visible in the air as he made his way toward the research station that lay hidden deep within the mountains. The expedition had been a failure. His team had been forced to abandon the mission after a series of unpredictable storms disrupted their communications. Now, stranded alone with only his gear and his thoughts for company, Jake was just trying to survive. He stumbled upon an alien girl, Lyra, who had been abandoned by her people, left to die in the frozen wilderness. Her skin shimmered a soft turquoise in the pale light of dawn, her silver hair blowing wildly in the wind. Despite the cold, she looked at him with piercing violet eyes that seemed to see right through him. Her body was fragile, but her spirit was unbroken. At first, she didn't speak to him. She couldn't, not at first. Her people, the Zirans, spoke in a complex set of clicks and hums, and Jake couldn't understand a word. Yet, there was something in her presence, something unspoken, that connected them. They had no shared language, no common bond, except the deep, primal connection of survival. He gave her warmth, he gave her food, and in return, she gave him something far more valuable, a sense of purpose. Over time, Jake came to realize that the bond between them was more than just survival. It was something deeper, something that resonated on a level he couldn't understand. They were different species, from different worlds, yet their hearts seemed to beat in sync, as if their rhythms were aligned by fate. Still, the alien customs were something Jake could not ignore. Lyra was bound by tradition, and it was only in the quiet of the morning, as the first rays of dawn lit the snow-covered landscape, that she shared her people's deepest customs with him. She told him, in her soft, melodic voice, that it was her people's tradition to bond with another, but only at dawn, when the two were in perfect harmony. Her words were simple, but they carried with them a weight that Jake had never experienced. What did this mean for them? Could their connection truly transcend their differences? For the first time in his life, Jake found himself at the crossroads of duty and desire. And as Lyra looked into his eyes, he realized that the line between the two had blurred beyond recognition. The wind howled through the narrow canyons as Jake and Lyra walked side by side, their footsteps crunching in the snow. The silence between them felt comfortable now, a far cry from the awkwardness of their first encounter. Jake, once so isolated in this harsh, frozen landscape, had found a strange sense of peace in Lyra's presence. She had begun to open up to him, not with words, but through the subtle ways her body moved and the expressions in her bright violet eyes. He didn't need to understand her language to sense the emotions she was conveying. She was conflicted. He could feel it. For the first time since meeting her, he noticed a certain tension in the way she carried herself, a heaviness that seemed to weigh her down more than the cold ever could. The dawn ritual, she had told him, was sacred to her people. It was not simply a tradition. It was a way of life, a bond that connected every Ziran in a profound way. But with Jake, she felt something deeper, something beyond their cultural boundaries. She couldn't explain it, and neither could he. As they trekked through the snow, Lyra's gaze kept flickering toward Jake, as if she were searching for something. He tried to ignore the flicker of curiosity that sparked inside him whenever their eyes met. He had been alone for so long, and now, with Lyra, it was different. She made him feel alive in a way he hadn't realized he'd been missing. She made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. The world around them seemed to vanish as they walked, the snow-covered terrain stretching out endlessly. Lyra's delicate hand brushed against his arm, sending a jolt of warmth through him despite the freezing temperatures. Jake glanced at her, but she quickly withdrew her hand, a faint blush coloring her pale cheeks. He could feel her hesitation, her inner turmoil, but there was something else too, a growing connection that neither of them could deny. The evening before, when Lyra had told him about her people's traditions, Jake had been captivated, not by the idea of a ritual, but by the raw honesty in her voice. It was clear that this tradition meant more to her than anything else, yet there was a part of her that wanted to break free from it, to embrace something new. As they continued their journey, Lyra stopped in her tracks, suddenly still, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Jake, sensing the change in her, took a cautious step closer. "What is it?" he asked quietly, unsure if he was intruding on something deeply personal. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, her eyes locked on the distant mountains. "There's something about this place," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I can't explain. It feels like we're meant to be here, at this moment, together." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of what they both felt but had yet to say. "I feel it too," Jake replied, his voice low. "I can't explain it either, but it's there. It's real." Lyra turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt charged, as if something was about to shift. "I never thought I'd find someone like you here," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. "A human, willing to stay with me, to help me, without asking for anything in return." Jake's heart swelled with emotion, but he kept his expression steady. "I'm not leaving," he said simply, his words carrying more weight than he intended. Lyra's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him, her body language relaxed for the first time since they'd met. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake nodded, his throat tight. He didn't need to say more. There were no words for what they both felt in that moment. Instead, they simply stood there, side by side, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sky turning a brilliant shade of orange. And for the first time since he'd arrived on this alien world, Jake felt truly at peace. It was late into the night when the silence of the frozen wilderness was broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. Jake and Lyra had settled near a small, makeshift camp, the glow of their fire casting flickering shadows against the icy walls of the cave. The temperature had plummeted, but the warmth from the fire, combined with the closeness of their shared space, was enough to keep them comfortable. Jake stared into the fire, his mind racing with thoughts of everything that had happened since he'd arrived on Zira. He had come here for a mission, but now, after meeting Lyra, it felt like he had found something far more important. His eyes flickered over to her. She was sitting by the fire, her violet eyes reflecting the flames, her face more relaxed than it had been before. She had shed some of her guardedness, the walls she had built so carefully now crumbling, piece by piece. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and sadness watching her, as if he had somehow helped her take a step toward healing. Lyra's eyes met his, and she smiled faintly. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft and unguarded. "Just thinking," Jake replied, offering a small smile in return. "About what?" she asked, leaning slightly toward him, her curiosity evident. Jake hesitated, unsure how to articulate the storm of emotions that had been brewing inside him since their time together. "About how strange it is," he said finally, his voice low, "that I've only known you for a short time, yet it feels like I've known you for much longer. As if everything in my life has led me to this moment." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her gaze penetrating and thoughtful. Then, she nodded slowly. "I feel the same way," she murmured. "When I first met you, I didn't know what to think. You were a human, an outsider. But now," she trailed off, her words hanging in the air, filled with unspoken meaning. Jake felt his heart race, a sense of anticipation building in the pit of his stomach. He had never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but in this moment, with Lyra sitting beside him, her words resonating deeply, he felt a bond that defied explanation. A bond that felt more real than anything he had ever known. As the fire crackled between them, the wind outside picking up, Lyra suddenly stood up, brushing snow from her clothes. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice tinged with a seriousness that caught Jake's attention. "Something that might change everything." Jake stood as well, his brow furrowing with concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease that was beginning to settle in his chest. Lyra turned toward him, her expression a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. "I told you about my people's tradition, about the ritual that happens at dawn. But there's more to it." she said. More than I've told you. The tradition is not just about bonding. It's about something deeper. Something that ties our souls together in ways you can't understand unless you experience it for yourself. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about the way she spoke, the intensity in her voice, that made him feel as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice. What does that mean for us? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her presence overwhelming in the dim light of the fire. It means that if we go through with this, there's no going back. It will change everything between us. Everything we are. Jake didn't hesitate. He had already made his choice. Then let's do it, he said simply. Let's face whatever comes together. Lyra looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable, before she gave a slight nod. Together, she agreed, her voice soft but resolute. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the cave, they both felt a shift in the air, as though the universe itself had conspired to bring them together at this very moment. The journey they had begun was just the beginning, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. It was the first rays of sunlight that filtered into the cave, the soft glow illuminating the snow-covered landscape outside. Jake stood at the entrance, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his mind still reeling from the decision they had made. Lyra had told him the tradition would begin at dawn, but now, standing in the quiet peace of the morning, he wasn't sure what to expect. He had never been one for rituals, but this was different. This was something more, something that transcended any expectations or understanding he had. Behind him, Lyra stirred, her silhouette appearing in the entrance of the cave, the delicate light reflecting off her turquoise skin. She was calm, more serene than Jake had ever seen her. Her silver hair shimmered like a halo around her face as she stepped forward, the weight of the moment settling between them. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice like a melodic whisper in the cool morning air. Jake turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no words to say, but the expression in his eyes spoke volumes. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. Lyra stepped closer to him, her presence filling the space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was a quiet understanding, a shared bond that neither could quite explain but both could feel. "This is our moment," Lyra murmured, her voice trembling just slightly. "Once we begin, everything will change. We will no longer be just two individuals. We will be connected in a way that goes beyond anything you can imagine." Jake nodded slowly, his throat tight. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but in his heart, he knew it was true. The world outside seemed to fall away as Lyra reached out, her hand gently brushing against his. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The wind howled outside, but in that quiet, intimate space, all was still. "I'm ready," Jake said, his voice steady, though he could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air between them. Lyra's eyes softened, and she took a deep breath. "Then let us begin," she said, her voice carrying a finality that made Jake's heart skip a beat. She stepped closer, and together they walked to the center of the cave, where the ancient symbols of Lyra's people were etched into the stone floor. These markings, he had learned, were not just decoration. They were part of a tradition that had been passed down for generations, a ritual that bound two souls together. As they stood together, Jake felt a strange pull, an energy that seemed to resonate between them. Lyra reached for his hand, and when their fingers touched, a warmth surged through him. It was as if the entire world shifted in that instant, and the connection between them deepened, becoming something tangible, something real. Lyra closed her eyes, and Jake did the same. In the stillness, he could hear the faint rhythm of her breathing, the steady beat of her heart that somehow seemed to align with his own. It was as if they were no longer separate beings, but part of something greater. And in that moment, Jake understood. He understood what Lyra had meant when she said their souls would be bound together. It wasn't just a connection of bodies or minds. It was something far deeper, something that transcended everything he had known. When they opened their eyes, the air around them seemed to shimmer with energy. Lyra looked at him, her expression a mixture of awe and serenity. "We are now bound, Jake," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Jake smiled softly, his hand still holding hers. "I know," he said simply, his voice steady with conviction. "I feel it too. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the land, they both knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound not just by tradition, but by something far stronger, the bond of the heart. It had been days since the ritual, and the world around Jake and Lyra seemed to have shifted in subtle ways. The connection they had shared that morning had not faded. It had only grown stronger, more profound. The cold of Zira no longer seemed so harsh, the wind no longer biting. Everything around them felt more vibrant, more alive. Yet, with this newfound connection came questions, lingering doubts that neither of them had voiced. Jake found himself constantly wondering about the future, about what would come of this bond. Would it change their lives forever? Was it really possible for someone like him, a human, to truly belong in Lyra's world, so different from his own? He hadn't voiced his concerns yet, and Lyra hadn't brought them up either. But as they walked side by side through the vast snow fields, the silence between them was heavier than before, filled with unspoken thoughts. "Jake," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence, her voice soft but clear. "I've been thinking." Jake looked at her, his heart skipping a beat. "About what?" he asked, his voice steady, though inside, his pulse quickened. "About us," she replied, her gaze fixed on the endless white landscape ahead. "About what this bond means. What it will mean for our future." Jake's heart sank. He had been hoping she wasn't thinking the same thing he was, that they were both unsure of what came next. "What do you think it means?" he asked, his voice quieter now, hesitant. Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his face with an intensity that caught him off guard. "I don't know," she said honestly. "All I know is that I've never felt this way before. About anyone. I've always been told that our traditions are everything, that the bond is sacred, unbreakable. But now I wonder if there's something more to it. Something I didn't understand before." Jake stepped closer to her, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of her words, the uncertainty in her voice, and it mirrored his own feelings. "I feel it too," he said, his voice gentle. "But I don't want to rush into anything. We've both been through so much already. I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize what we have." Lyra nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I don't want to lose you, Jake. I don't want to risk this connection, this us. But I also know that there are things we can't control. We come from two different worlds. There are things about my people, about my society, that I don't even fully understand. And I don't know if I can reconcile that with this." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jake wanted to say something, to reassure her, but he didn't know what to say. All he knew was that in this moment, standing together in the freezing cold, with the vastness of Zira stretching out before them, there was no one else he'd rather be with. "What do you want to do?" he asked softly. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "I want to keep going. I want to see where this path leads us. Together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, Jake, but I want to face it with you by my side." Jake reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Lyra smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Jake's heart swell. And in that moment, standing together in the frozen wilderness, surrounded by the vast unknown, they both knew that they had made the right choice. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to take, and they would take it, together. It had been weeks since Jake and Lyra made their decision to face whatever came next together. As the days passed, the bond between them only deepened. They had spent countless hours together, walking through the endless snow, sitting in quiet companionship by the fire, and sharing stories of their worlds. Despite the vast differences between their cultures, they had found something common between them, something that transcended everything they had known before. One evening, as they stood near the edge of the frozen cliff, looking out over the vast expanse of Zira, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. From the first moment they met, when she was cold and distant, to now, when she stood beside him with an openness he never expected, he had witnessed a transformation not just in Lyra, but in himself as well. He had come to this planet as an outsider, someone just passing through, but now, with Lyra, he felt as if he had a place here. "Jake," Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but clear. He turned to find her gazing at him, a faint smile on her lips. What's on your mind? He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. Just thinking, he said, his voice thoughtful. About everything. About how we ended up here. She raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Jake shook his head quickly. No, not at all. I don't know. This place, this bond we have, it's bigger than I expected. It feels right. But also, he trailed off, unsure how to put it into words. But also, there's so much we don't know, she finished for him, her voice softer now. She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. I know what you mean. There's a lot about my people, about our customs, that I haven't told you yet. But the more I spend time with you, the more I realize that maybe it's not about what we don't know. Maybe it's about what we do know, about us, here, together. Jake looked into her eyes, feeling that familiar warmth spread through him. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with certainty. She smiled, and for the first time in days, she seemed at peace. You know, Lyra continued, this place, Zira, it's been my home for so long. But with you, I feel like I'm seeing it through new eyes. Everything is different now. The cold doesn't seem so cold. The silence isn't so overwhelming. It's like I've finally found where I belong. Jake felt his chest tighten, a mix of warmth and tenderness flooding through him. Maybe it's not about where we are, he said quietly, but about who we're with. Lyra's eyes softened as she reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. Maybe you're right, she whispered, stepping closer still. Maybe it's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, for who you are, without expectations, without judgment. Jake nodded, his grip tightening on her hand. That's what we've found in each other, isn't it? She smiled again, her violet eyes filled with a quiet certainty. Yes, and maybe that's enough. They stood there for a long time, the world around them quiet, save for the soft whistle of the wind. Jake didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, he knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he and Lyra would face it together. No matter how cold, no matter how uncertain. Together. It had been days since their quiet conversation by the cliff, and the world around Jake and Lyra had settled into a new rhythm. The initial rush of emotion from their bond had settled, replaced with something deeper, more grounded. They moved through each day with a sense of purpose, and yet, there was an undercurrent of anticipation that neither of them could ignore. Jake found himself increasingly aware of the growing connection between them, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Lyra's presence was a constant comfort, her voice a calming melody that echoed in his thoughts long after she had spoken. But with this growing closeness came the reality that they were living in a world filled with unspoken rules, unacknowledged traditions, and the lingering question of what would happen next. Despite all the time they had spent together, there was one topic neither of them had fully discussed: the future. What would it mean for them to live side by side in this harsh, alien world? Would they ever be accepted by Lyra's people, or would their bond forever be an anomaly, something to be tolerated but never truly understood? One evening, as the cold night air settled in around their camp, Jake sat beside the fire, the warmth from the flames flickering against his skin. Lyra sat next to him, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the stars above. The silence was comfortable, but there was an edge to it, a question neither of them had voiced. Jake. Lyra finally spoke, breaking the quiet. Her voice was soft, but there was something in it that made him sit up straighter. We need to talk. Jake turned to face her, his heart skipping a beat. About what? He asked, his voice steady. Lyra hesitated for a moment before speaking, her gaze still fixed on the stars. About us. About what happens after this. I've been thinking a lot about the future and about what it means to be with someone from a different world, from a different species. Jake's stomach tightened. He knew this conversation was coming, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. I've thought about it too, he admitted. But I don't have all the answers, Lyra. All I know is that I want to be here. I want to be with you. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. I want that too, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. But I'm not sure if it's enough. You're human. I'm Jiran. My people, my world, will never fully accept you. And I don't know if we can survive in a place that doesn't understand what we have. Jake felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had known that Lyra's people might not accept him, but hearing it from her, someone he had grown so close to, someone he had trusted, made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. He didn't know what to say at first, but then the words came, slow but certain. Maybe we don't need to be accepted by everyone, he said, his voice steady. Maybe what matters is that we accept each other. We've already made this work, haven't we? In our own way, we've built something strong. And that's enough for me. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment, she seemed to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing. I hope you're right, she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. I hope we can make it work. But the world we live in, it's not that simple. I've spent my whole life following the traditions of my people. I don't know if I can just throw it all away. Jake reached out, placing his hand over hers. I'm not asking you to throw anything away, Lyra. I'm asking you to make a choice for yourself, for us. What we have doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Lyra looked down at their joined hands, her fingers curling around his. Slowly, she nodded. I don't know what the future holds, Jake. But I know that I want to try. I want to see where this leads. Jake smiled, his heart swelling with relief. Then let's face it together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Lyra smiled back, a small but genuine smile that made Jake feel like everything was possible again. In that moment, surrounded by the cold, harsh world of Zira, they had found warmth in each other. And for now, that was enough. It had been several days since their conversation by the fire, and although the cold winds of Zira still howled outside, a sense of peace had settled between Jake and Lyra. They spent their days exploring the alien world, searching for supplies, and learning more about each other. The bond they shared had only deepened, but with it came the realization that their connection was not without its complexities. Jake had never considered himself a man of tradition, but Lyra's words about the importance of her people's customs had weighed on him. The thought of being an outsider in her world, despite their closeness, lingered in his mind. They had found solace in each other, but the unspoken challenges remained. As they sat together one evening, watching the stars glitter above them, like distant diamonds, Lyra broke the silence. Jake, have you ever thought about what comes after all of this? Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. Jake turned to face her, his heart tightening at the question. He knew they couldn't stay in this moment forever. The world around them was vast and unknown, and the future was always just beyond their reach. I think about it all the time, he admitted. But I don't know what the answer is yet. I don't think I need to have all the answers right now. Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face, as if looking for something more. You're right, she said slowly. Maybe we don't need to figure it all out yet. But there's something inside me that worries. I've always been taught that my people's traditions are what define us. And no matter how much I feel connected to you, I can't just ignore that. Jake felt a pang of empathy for her. He understood the weight of tradition, of belonging to something larger than oneself. I get that, he said, his voice steady. But we don't have to let traditions define us. We can make our own path, together. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. Together, she repeated, her voice filled with a softness that made Jake's heart swell. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can make our own way. But what if I'm not strong enough? What if my people never accept us? Jake reached out and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. I believe in us, he said firmly. I believe in what we've built together. And I believe that whatever comes, we can face it. Lyra nodded, though her expression was still filled with doubt. I want to believe that too, she murmured. But there are so many things that are out of our control. My world, it's not ready for something like us. Jake stood and walked over to the edge of their camp, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. He understood her fears. He had them too. But the strength of their bond, the trust they had in each other, was something that couldn't be ignored. As he turned back to Lyra, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the same uncertainty he felt reflected in her expression. But there was something else there too, hope. Maybe it's not about them accepting us, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of certainty. Maybe it's about us accepting each other. Maybe that's enough. Lyra stood and walked toward him, her steps steady, her presence comforting. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, a soft touch that felt like a promise. You're right, she whispered. Maybe that is enough. And for the first time, as the stars shone brightly above them, Jake felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. The future was uncertain, the road ahead unknown, but with Lyra by his side, he knew they would find their way. Together. It had been a few weeks since Jake and Lyra had come to terms with the complexities of their relationship, and with each passing day, they found themselves more attuned to each other. The journey they had begun together was no longer about survival. It was about understanding and embracing the unknown, together. The world around them remained cold and unforgiving, but in the warmth of their connection, they found a sense of peace that neither of them had ever known. One morning, as they stood together near the campfire, watching the early light break across the horizon, Jake turned to Lyra, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "Lyra," he said, "there's something I need to ask you." Lyra turned toward him, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight, and she waited patiently for him to continue. "We've talked about the future, about what might come," Jake said slowly, "but I think it's time we make a decision. What happens if we go back? What happens if we return to your people?" Lyra's expression softened, and she stepped closer, taking his hand in hers. The warmth of her touch sent a wave of comfort through him. "Jake," she began, her voice filled with quiet conviction, "I've thought about that a lot. And I know there are risks, there are things we can't control. But no matter what happens, I don't want to face it without you." Her words, simple as they were, brought a sense of clarity to Jake's mind. He had known from the beginning that their journey wouldn't be easy. But he also knew, deep down, that he couldn't imagine facing the unknown without Lyra by his side. "We've already chosen each other," Jake said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And whatever comes next, I'm ready to face it, with you." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something Jake couldn't quite name. "Together," she whispered, as if the word itself held the promise of everything they had built. Together, they had faced the cold, the isolation, the unknowns of a world far from home. And together, they would face whatever came next. For the first time, as the sun rose higher and the warmth of the day began to settle around them, Jake felt a sense of certainty. The path ahead was unclear, the future uncertain. But as long as they had each other, that was all that mattered. They didn't need to have all the answers. They just needed to trust in what they shared. With a final glance at the distant horizon, Jake turned back to Lyra, his heart full of quiet resolve. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go home." Lyra nodded, her hand still in his, and together they began to walk, side by side, into the unknown, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it together, as they always had.